increase. So welcome everyone. My name's Kieran. I'm the Assistant Director at Play Australia, and I've got my colleague in Karen Williams on the line today, and we'll be co-hosting today's session. We've got our Executive Director, Barb Champion, on the line as well. However, Barb's in our office at Westerfolds Park and the Wi-Fi can be pretty horrible there. So we thought it a safer option for me to host today. But firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. I'm on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. Today's special online learning session is called Planning and Design for Play in the Built Environment. So such an important topic. It's the fifth and final session of our online learning series for our autumn series, and we welcome you all here today. We also want to kick off proceedings by giving a very special shout out to one Robin Munro-Miller, who's on the panel today. So Robin wears many hats. Play Australia New South Wales Committee member, Play Australia board member, president of the International Play Association. I like calling you world president. It's fantastic. And I'm thrilled to say that Robin's now received an AM in the Queen's Birthday Honour List earlier this week. So if we can see all those animated hand claps, it would be amazing. And this is due to Robin's tireless focus on protecting the rights of children, and particularly the rights of those children to play. So big congratulations, Robin. Big win for you, but it's a bigger win for the industry, for the play sector, for the play system. It's a win for us. It's a win for children's rights as well. So well done, and welcome. All right. Now, in terms of quick housekeeping matters, most of you should have been on our online Teams platform before. But for those who don't know, what we do is we keep you on mute for the duration of the presentation. However, we enable you to unmute during the panel section where you can actually put up your hand and ask questions. Although we do encourage you to enter your questions in the chat log. So that little bubble with the lines through it that looks like a talking bubble, you can click on that and you can post questions there. And just to let you know that today we are recording today's session for those that can't attend, so we can share it. So now on to today, where we're exploring how we embed planning and design for play in the built environment, so we can ultimately support our communities to better access quality environments for play. Our Play Australia New South Wales Committee has been working really hard to produce a very special document called the Advisory Note. And this document's been co-authored by a number of people in the New South Wales Committee, including Claire Edwards, Fiona Abay, Robin Munro-Miller, Helen Little, Sue Elliott, and Rick McConaughey. And I'd like to warmly welcome both Claire and Fiona, and I think, Robin, you're going to jump into this section a little bit later to the online floor to introduce the document before we move into the panel section. But I'll just say a quick few words about both Claire and Fiona. Claire has an amazing research and community engagement background involving a strong play advocacy focus to support the development of quality public spaces for children and particularly young people. Fiona Abay is a long-standing Play Australia member, landscape architect and horticulturalist who has specialised in the design of outdoor children's environments and has worked as a landscape architect for over 30 years. So welcome, Claire and Fiona, and Robin a bit later, but I'll leave it to both of you to introduce this document.
Thanks, Kieran. So to give you an overview, have we got the PowerPoint up?
Sorry, it's just coming.
We'll just wait a tick.
Planning and design for play in the built environment.
And we'll just ask everyone to keep themselves on mute, please.
Okay. So if we go to the next slide, Claire.
And that's looking good, Claire.
Yeah, cool.
Thank you.
Thanks. To give you an overview of what we're going to cover off today, firstly, we'll summarise why we wrote the advisory note in the first place. We'll touch on some of the topics it addresses. Robin's going to explain the 4 design principles embedded in the advisory note And then we're going to have a special panel discussion on how to use the advisory note in everyday life. So we'll start the session by asking why we wrote the advisory note. What is the backstory, Claire?
So in February 2021, the New South Wales Department of Planning, Industry and Environment and the New South Wales Government Architect published the Explanation of Intended Effect for a Design and Place State Environmental Planning Policy, including an Urban Design Guide. It adopted a place-based planning approach and outlined 5 great principles. It also aligned with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals pictured here and the World Health Organization Healthy Cities Programme and the Resilient Cities Movement. Significantly, the SDG goals include number 3, good health and well-being, number 10, reduction in inequalities, number 11, making cities inclusive, safe, resilient and sustainable. We see play as fundamental in the fulfillment of these goals, principles and programs. However, play was not included in the draft SEP. So in 2020, we wrote to the government architect in support of the SEP and advocated for the inclusion of play as an intrinsic part of healthy human life, and emphasised that the conditions for play are highly susceptible to the quality and the promotion of play in our built environments. We advocated for play from the doorstep to the domain and highlighted that providing opportunities to play improves children and young people's health and well-being, and having access to safe spaces supports their socialisation. We emphasised that we need to redress the contemporary situation that 25% of children and young people in Australia are overweight or obese, and the rising rates of mental illness. Here is an example of a play web or map produced by Antwerp City Council in 2018, highlighting a network of play routes. In the second draft of the SEP, the then Minister of the DPIE said, "My intention is that when finalised, the SEP will help deliver the developments our communities need in the places that we want to live, work and play." We felt this was a step in the right direction, but still Australia was lacking documentation related to play in the built environment that a practitioner could reference. So the advisory note was written to assist councils and practitioners to help deliver places where we want to play, while also acknowledging the impact of the Everyone Can Play guidelines. Do you want to tell us more about this, Fiona?
Yes, sure. So that's the Everyone Can Play guide up on the screen. And the New South Wales Everyone Can Play guideline is our only state government play guide at this point. And some of the other states have their own guides too, it's important to say. The main success of the Everyone Can Play guide is that it gave government departments a tangible document to refer to as regards inclusive playground provision, something you can grasp in your hand to back the 2014 Disability Inclusion Act's requirements. Importantly, it also came with money backing it, and that was through a recurring grant program, and that boosted local government's ability to build inclusive playgrounds. However, looking beyond the Everyone Can Play guide, there's a noticeable gap in policy documents that address play in the overall built environment. How should we be thinking about integrating play in our public domain spaces, considering children play everywhere? The design for play focus tends to be in designated spaces such as playgrounds and skate parks, but not across the public domain. So in other words, we need policy that provides guidance on how to plan and design the public domain to be inclusive to children and young people, and that especially supports play. Equally important is the promotion of the sense of agency. Children and young people need to be able to independently access these spaces. Now, the advisory note begins to fulfill this gap. This is its real role. We're also heartened that in January 2022, the Committee of Sydney and Arup published the Future of Sydney report, which directly addresses play outcomes in the built environment. So, if children are visible, legitimate, and frequent users of public spaces, remind us, Claire, why we need to hear their voices in the planning and design of the public domain.
From a government commitment and planning perspective, place-based planning is a design-led and collaborative way of examining the complexity of the city by viewing it as a conglomeration of different places, each with a unique potential and characteristics. It is also a means to better understand a place, to build relationships and facilitate collaboration between stakeholders, to draw on their local expertise, knowledge, and investment to deliver a shared vision and solutions that respond to a place's potential, people's needs, and values. Also, the Australian government in 2016 endorsed the New Urban Agenda, with Dr. Gillian Bird, the Australian ambassador at the UN Habitat 3 conference, stating that the New Urban Agenda's success requires the active involvement of all relevant stakeholders, from local and national governments to the private sector, civil society, and critically, residents who live in these cities. Even the 1979 New South Wales Environmental Planning and Assessment Act calls for an increase in community participation in environmental planning. You may or may not know, but the Perrottet government recently withdrew the design and place SEP, but our document was written in response to the use of place-based planning approaches and to align with policy as outlined above. As such, we feel that our advisory note has national relevance and engaging with the community is critical to this. So the advisory note reminds us of these commitments, that children and young people are stakeholders and that they have a role in place-based planning, as well as a right to be involved in decisions that affect their lives, including matters relating to the design and planning of our cities and places. Children and young people are competent at expressing their needs and sharing their local knowledge with planners and designers. And there's plenty of best practice models out there to use as guidance. Children and young people are the experts on play. And engaging children and young people can result in innovative solutions. E.g., pictured here in the bottom right is a gasometer converted to a scuba diving practice centre. We also have a responsibility to empower children and young people as citizens of a democracy, that their future places are being designed now and to contribute. Authentic engagement processes are also simple and delightful to put into effect, but they need funding. If we don't design with their needs in mind, conflicts often occur and places can become hazardous. Referring to this example here, after school conglomerations of children at shopping centres and transport hubs looking for quick, cheap snacks on their way home causes friction with other users of space and shopping centres and between other children. This has become a problem in some shopping centres, certainly in Sydney, and the owners have had to provide social services and more security to try and redress the problem. So designing children and young people in and not out is our wish. For planners and designers and play providers, the importance of play itself is often underplayed or misunderstood. The advisory note has a tremendous section on what play is and what its benefits are. Can you tell us more about this, Fiona?
Sure. Firstly, the note gives us an excellent definition of play, and this is very necessary in policy making. So I'll just go over that. Play is characterized by a process which is intrinsic, freely chosen, creative, child-directed, and participatory. Play is an emergent process where the means are prioritized over outcomes. We keep noticing how councils need a definition to frame up their documentation on just what play is. And the guide reminds us also, along with this important definition, of the benefits of play. And just summarising the benefits. Play benefits every domain of a child's healthy development. Play facilitates higher levels of activity while providing skills critical to lifelong positive health and well-being. And play contributes to children and young people's sense of belonging, connection to community, and connection to the natural world. So the importance of play has been highlighted during these COVID lockdowns, and play deprivation is becoming a global issue leading to health and well-being issues. And so there's an actual urgency that we define clearly what play is and talk about this elusive topic. What is play? Why is it so beneficial? When we are planning and designing public spaces, the advisory note gives us 4 important principles to guide our thinking. This gives us a strong platform from which to work in any context. Following these principles gives any project the best possible chance of being child-friendly. So could you take us through these 4 principles, Robin?
So, thank you, Fiona. And so we come to the case for play. And this is an easy way for us to assist councils and practitioners and planners to really keep in mind what we have to be aware of when we're planning for play. And we have put it in a little bit of an acronym because we know how successful YMCA has been. How many of you have ever, done the YMCA dance? Come on, show of hands. I don't see much happening, but I'm sure there's a show of hands there. And so we now have, you can practice this in your own time. We'll do it when we get together. We have the case for play. So it's C-A-S-E, so you can, I don't know how to do an S or an E, but that's up to you. But we do have these 4 elements that we really want to take you through. And the beauty of the advisory note that we've prepared is that for each element, there are sort of just some questions to stimulate discussion and your thought about how you might implement that. And the first one is, of course, C, and that is around the context and the vision. And this is because the development has to be authentic with your engagement processes with children and young people featuring as the foundation of what you do. So if we are looking at any sort of space that we're trying to actually ensure everyone can use, children and young people are key people in that. And the way we communicate with them, whether it be through some face-to-face consultations or some other methods, is something that as planners, we need to be aware of it, and councils need to say, how are we going to basically provide a context for what we're doing and how are we going to engage with children and young people in that process? And some of it may be around also observation of how young people are using the space. I mean, the example of the shopping centre immediately tells us we've got an issue there. We need to consult about how to address it. So the starting point of context and vision means that authentic engagement process with children and young people. The second one is the A part, which of course we all know how to do an A, having been skilled in the YMCA dance, the accessible and inclusive. So this is around ensuring our spaces can actually be a shared purpose. So we don't always have to see every space as relegated to a specific task, but trying to actually look at how spaces can be multi-purpose, how they can invite some shared participation from not just children, but also the elderly, those with disabilities, youth, and looking at where we can create those pockets of play provision within the environment. So we have some questions there designed to sort of stimulate that and to look at that. And as I say, listening and thinking about what accessible and inclusive means for your community. and relying back on children and young people to help give you some of that vision of where they've felt excluded, or for parents, how do you encourage children to play if you've got to be, you know, there's nowhere for you to sit, there's nowhere for you to actually be in a position that you can see what the kids are doing and still create a safe environment. It's those little considerations that are the difference between a great public place and a place that's quite restricted to a particular group of people. The third one, and as climate change hits us, the S for sustainability and around social and well maintained. It's great to have places to play. However, if we haven't considered how we are able to make those spaces, you know, welcoming, obviously well maintained, and also, you know, cool, you know, have we got trees? What are we doing in regards to weather? Are those spaces able to be used in wet weather? I'm a big fan of there's no such thing as bad conditions for play, it's just inappropriate clothing. But even in sort of certain circumstances, we want to know that those spaces that are being created have an option for being used during different weather patterns. And obviously there are some spaces that are going to be in more demand during particular weather because of their ability to sort of support people to continue to play or be in the natural spaces. We need to be aware that the maintenance program for these particular places is really important part of maintaining that sustainability, maintaining the fact that they're social and well maintained. And so we do ask some questions about when planning, are you also planning for the maintenance of these spaces and how and when and what the process will be? And looking at the materials being used to see if there is enough materials there to actually allow these natural spaces to be used in the multi-purpose way. And there is a lot of evidence to show that, you know, biophilia, we're naturally attracted to green spaces, and green spaces are good for us. And so these ties in very heavily with our health and well-being. We cannot put the way we maintain our places, our play spaces, as separate to what we're doing for the health and well-being of the community and the mental health of the community. The case for play also is the case for good health and good mental health and well-being. And so the case remains the same. And finally, that point around empowering. And as Claire mentioned about in Antwerp, the network of play routes. I mean, children will and young people will play anywhere, okay? And we cannot think that it's going to be restricted to one particular space. So how do we create an environment that actually allows for that? You know, we call it independent mobility and, you know, exploring and discovering, but I actually call it that, you know, that ability to play and that independent playability as we move through. And I'm reminded of we've got a couple of examples with the International Play Association, and you can access the YouTube videos of people presenting on what they've done. The IPA Awards have Play in the Community and Rethinking Play Environments. And that's just, and in both instances, we've got examples across the world of people creating simple affordances, simple changes in the environment that have actually promoted social interaction and have promoted people engaging with play and engaging with each other. And so we want spaces that are empowering, and we want to ensure that, you know, that we can create play in a range of places. The example you see on the screen is the Japanese Walk to School program. And, you know, walking the areas and the routes kids walk, that individual play routes are also places that they walk to school. You know, we can never underestimate what happens on the way to school. And if you call yourself when you were walking to school, what sort of play opportunities you got up to, you know, and how you played. You've only got to see a small fence to know that that's just too tempting for someone not to balance along. And I think we need to actually be aware of that in our planning, that we want our spaces to be empowering. And once again, we have a series of questions so that you can also relate that back when you're doing the consulting to how are we going to empower our kids and our young people so that they feel part of the environment, not an add-on to the environment. As Claire mentioned, we want to design with them, not sort of, and not have them added on. and that's the design them into the space, not onto the space. And this case for play, hopefully, you may have different words put up on your sort of notice boards around the place. Be great to see the case up to remind you whenever you're planning, these are the sort of the 4 essential things that we think have to be taken into account. And we hope that the fact sheet that's been provided, this advisory note, helps to create those conversations. And as I said at the beginning, use the case for play to look at it in your own environments, how you will reflect in each way context, accessibility, inclusiveness, sustainability, and empowerment to ensure that you're planning for public spaces for play. So I'll hand back over.
Right, I think this is me. So look, thanks to all 3 of you for presenting the advisory note, and what a fantastic framework. Yeah, I just love those case principles, and I can certainly see application for those principles in our broader work, and it can really drive some interesting conversations nationally. So I'll be pinching those and using those as much as I can. But it's a fantastic document that you've pulled together. We will circulate it to all attendees, so it will be in a follow-up email. We've also got it profiled on the Play Australia website. And so there's this big question now in terms of how do we take all these words and apply it in our everyday lives. And look, to address this important question, we'd love to invite our panelists in. And also a reminder to those tuning in that you can post questions in the chat, but also you can put up your hand by using the reaction button, and you're happy to welcome you in if you've got a question for our panelists. So on our panel today, we have Dana Spence, Manager, Sport and Recreation from Camden Council. We've got Barbara Schaefer, Principal Landscape Architect from the Office of New South Wales Government Architect. And we've got our inclusion expert, our inclusive play expert in Kim Besharan from Touch by Olivia. So welcome, Dana, Barbara and Kim. It's great to have you here. So this question, how do we actually apply it in our everyday work? And I think it might be interesting to go to you first, Barbara, from a state perspective as we work our way down. What does it mean for you, and what does it mean for your working practice? And I've got you. Oh, you're on mute. Sorry, Barbara.
Thank you so much for a great presentation from Play Australia. I think that the principles that are embodied in this advisory document are really fantastic. They're incredibly succinct, and they provide an outstanding opportunity for policymakers to potentially integrate these principles into upcoming policy statements. And I love the idea that you were talking about play from the doorstep to the public domain. And I can already see, even in terms of, say, the green grid policy work that we've done, that idea of incorporating these ideas and this thinking, in that network of open space, similar to the Antwerp example. So I think that what this document does is it really gives us a real nudge to think about, as you said, the case for play in a fresh way, taking into account, principles that are just so important in good urban design planning, such as, being very mindful of the context within which you're working, the importance of, green space, urban canopy, beautiful environments. I think it ties in a lot. And, disappointingly, yes, the CEP was pulled, but I think that there are other opportunities from a policy perspective where we can consider this thinking, as there is going to be a new urban design guide that is being produced, and I think that it would be great for this to, for this document to potentially inform or be considered as part of the thinking as we go forward. So, and I think what's great also about the document is that it's incredibly succinct, And, I think that CASE is a lovely way to, the case for play is a great way, for people to sort of grasp the concepts in a very, and also what I love about it are the questions for reflection, because what it does is it allows each person to bring their own individual response to those to those reflections and those questions, which then creates, a uniqueness potentially in the response. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Barbara. And look, totally agree with you in terms of it being such an accessible and simple document to engage with, which means that it's actually easier to embed into practice down the road. Dana, welcome to the panel. How do you see? How would you apply this this advisory note to your work at Camden Council?
Thank you for asking, Kieran. I was just listening to everything Barbara was saying and couldn't agree more. One of the things that really struck me as well were the questions for reflection. And I think it just gives us an opportunity to step back away from the paper. We get so busy with the paper and standards and how far things are apart and what they'll look like, but we've actually forgotten what it's going to feel like when you're in that environment. How will you feel when you're in that space? And so I would encourage us all to think about the people, the families, the children that'll be using our spaces, and to encourage us to really involve them in the planning. So they are the champions for creating great spaces. We have to design and nurture our spaces so that people want to come to them, that they're comfortable, that they feel welcoming. I mean, if any of you, I'm going to go on my Canadian heritage here. So skiing and cold weather, like Robin was saying, there's no bad weather. You just have to dress for it, right? But if anybody has ever seen a child on skis, they stand at the top of the hill and they pelt down as fast as they can. They're not afraid. And this is what we need to do on our environments, is have children lead that exploration so that their parents can follow them and go, you know what? It's not a scary place. There's wonderful opportunities out there to explore and get independent and learn a bit more about green things out there. And so I would encourage us to listen to that, the children and the young people who don't have the fear that we have. They really get it. And so I would just encourage us to use that excitement and wonder and try and immerse ourselves in our spaces when we're designing them.
Great reminder, Dana, and I think it's a massive social blocker in terms of how we plan for built environment and promote quality spaces to play that support children and young people. That fear is a massive blocker. And yeah, we can learn so much from our children. So totally agree. Look, Kim, welcome to the panel. Kim's actually on our New South Wales committee as well, and works at Touched by Olivia. What does this mean for you, this document, and how do you see yourself using it, Kim?
Well, I've been privy to actually have the document for a little while, and I already have been using it. So I think what might be nice is if I share some of the feedback that I've received from different councils, and I work with councils and developers right around the country, as you know, as we build our Livy's places. And the foundation of ours is, community-led, particularly raising the voices of children and people living with disability in their communities. So, I always say that what I love about this document is it actually backs up with some paper and some really practical support, as both Dana and Barbara have indicated, to how we can increase the skill for people who are wanting to do better in this space. So, we all know we've got our gurus of play, and I'm just a learner, but I keep learning along the way. But the will is always high. It's just the skill sometimes is low. And also we get very caught in blinkers, as Dana was saying, with papers and standards and budgets and deadlines and there. And so this can often help us, whilst a lot of the work is sometimes facilitating people to lift themselves out of that, this document is something that can capacity build people to do that, which I think is fantastic. The other thing I always say is that, you know, who decides where kids are playing? And it's adults often, and it's adult specialists that have all got their own agendas. Now, yes, I do agree with that, but ultimately, you know, we need to see how it's going to be used and walk in the footsteps of the children and the families and the people who maybe are outside the edges in our design if we really want this just use of public space. The other lovely thing is, like I've said, it's not just in our design, but, you know, working with some of the smaller and regional councils who maybe don't have the big teams and the expertise on hand, this actually supports them thinking about, oh, do we need a play policy, right? And then this is how we talk about, so it's not just for our play spaces, but this is our starting point. But how can we start to think about applying some of these really broad and generic concepts when we're designing for all of our spaces? So I think that it's actually a really good seed document where will is high, but maybe skill and capacity at this point in time or mindset is a little bit low. It's a document also that I've shared with counsellors who are, you know, those really high decision makers or maybe seed setters, because it is actually quite motivating and empowering, as we said, and we want people to take this by the gauntlet, you know, and take it forward. So that's another use that I've had and really good feedback from it. The fact that it's you can just literally copy chunks out and put them into documents, and they're very meaningful and very easy to use, has another bit of feedback. And please do so. It is our gift. We want it to be used, shared, use and abuse. And I think the other thing is that's really important is it gives people who are trying to state the case for play in regards to getting some funds or changing some engagement or trying something new. It's actually got some backup and some meat that they can actually use when they're trying, if you've got a champion in a council or someone who's trying to increase children's voice or, you know, more inclusive engagement or more play options. They've got something that they can take forward and start to think about how you might need to measure impact of what we're doing along these lines as well. So it ties in with, you know, DAPs and green policies and all the rest of it. You can slip this into all your other policies as well, which I think is great.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Kim. Hey, Claire, I might get you to exit the presentation, and that way it'll go offline and you can sort of see us a bit more. Look, I do welcome questions. So please enter your questions into the chat or put up your hand if you do have a question there. Look, I think we've got another question up there. What might stop people from applying the document? And I guess this is in appreciation that the group of people in this room, we're play advocates. We can see a huge value in the context of this document, and huge value in play itself in terms of supporting healthier long-term communities, healthier children, healthier young people. But there's some real world challenges out there in terms of why people and groups don't see the value in play, and why this kind of planning advice hasn't been afforded for in the types of plans and designs that we see or we have seen historically. So I guess how do we tackle these barriers? So I might go to Barbara first again. Well, in your line of work, Barbara, what's stopping people from jumping on board the play bus?
I think, you know, possibly there might be, I mean, one of the points that were raised was about empowering children and, you know, hearing children's voices. So there potentially could be, you know, some concern about delaying the process or the perceived expense of, you know, consulting with children. I mean, that could be something that might get in the way of applying. But you know, so, you know, everybody's, I think that Dana was talking about timeframes, you know, that people are concerned about timeframes, so concerned that maybe, you know, having to consult could hold up a process. You know, another thing is, you know, I suppose adults feel like they're excellent decision makers. Why do you need the voice of children in this? We know what needs to be done. I mean, hearing, it's quite hard to sort of play devil's advocate, because hearing, this presentation, I think what I find so fantastic about the document is that it's actually raising the profile of play as, as an important element for built environment designers outside of the traditional playground. So I think that, on many levels, it shouldn't really block, the document shouldn't block the uptake. I think it's maybe about, providing ideas and recommendations for consultation processes that could potentially make it easier to include the voices of children, in the conversation.
Yes.
But I think, probably time and cost. But
yes.
On many levels, I think that, good urban design should really be considering, and that's what your case for, your case for play does, is that it's really sound urban design principles that would be included, but just holding this beacon of, of play there to help inform decisions. So, yeah, I suppose time and money.
Yeah,
that's what could block.
No, thanks for your honest assessment, Barbara. Dana, from a local government perspective, time, money, they're obvious blockers. Is there anything else that's holding things up, do you think?
I'm looking at all the questions popping up as well, so I'm going to keep this really brief. But I would only just say the barriers are probably more perceived than real. And so if anybody's had the joy of doing the consultation with young people and children properly, and I know Fiona can speak to this really well, the results you get back are 10 times the effort you put in. And so once you've had that experience and you see what great results you get from that and how that will enhance your public spaces, you'll never go back to not doing it. So I think once you've done it, it just opens up a whole new world. So I would just encourage people to use the practice note and people's experience and give it a go. And you'll be a convert once you've done it once.
Terrific. Thanks, Dana. Look, I'm just jumping into the chat now. I can see some questions coming through. Peter Semple. Now, last time I invited you into a chat, Peter, your microphone didn't work. Does your microphone work today? I don't. Perhaps not. But Peter asked, does the paper illustrate the economic benefit? Thinking about how we win over traditional gatekeepers who are driven by the dollars. Activating our streets will bring social and economic benefits at street level and public spaces. Great work has been done in giving value to trees in our streets. Can we illustrate this showing the benefit to young people? And Barb, if your microphone works, I know you've sort of said, can you respond to Peter's question about the economic imperative? So take it away, Barb.
Thanks, Kieran. I think it's a really terrific issue that Peter has raised, because it is a further direction that we at Play Australia need to go. We've been going down the health benefits for a very long time, and we've got lots and lots of data internationally and nationally and locally about the benefits of children's health to play. But we need to then go one step further and put that into an economic framework. I absolutely agree with that. And I'm mindful of what cities have done in the past concerning things like cultural development and so forth. I can remember that the City of Melbourne has had many economic statements to show that if you have theatres operating and you have people coming to festivals and so forth, it brings huge economic development to the city. Well, play is exactly the same. If we can get an economic case, and we're very lucky because we've got lots of wonderful tertiary university members of ours that we can talk to about this, but I think it's a really grand idea. Thanks, Pete. And when you come back from a year in Ireland, we'll have it done, I promise.
Thanks, Thanks, Pete. Thanks, Barb. Robin, did you want to touch on your really important point?
Yeah, I just wanted to remind us all that when it comes to all organisations, all adults, Australia is a signatory to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, and children have a right to be consulted on matters that affect them, and public spaces are one of those. And so it really is an obligation. It's actually not optional. It really is, you know, that C is actually an obligation of us all as duty bearers, and we're all required to do it. So I think that's something that we often don't emphasise enough, but it's something that always needs to be kept in mind. And local government and state and federal governments, they are definitely named in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. So that really needs to be the forefront of their decision makers, because Australia is a signatory, as is New Zealand, for our New Zealand colleagues that are with us today.
Fantastic. Thanks, Robin. Jessica, in the chat, he's asking about sharing some different examples of what does meaningful engagement look like with children and young people. So in the context of developing playgrounds and public spaces. Fiona, I think you've been earmarked for this one in Jess's comment.
Sure. You know, the first important to raise is about the authenticity of the process. So we quite often find we'll start a process off with a council, typically, where we're told, oh no, the consultation has happened already, we don't need any. And we find that consultation was an online survey, typically put on the Have Your Say website. And we're finding that kids and young people don't necessarily know to access those opportunities. And it's really worth following up on this and being vigilant and giving them a voice in the projects. This quite often involves us having to be quite proactive on children's rights. And that's a normal role for a designer, is to be that proactive person who says, I can do more. And yes, we've got time constraints. I'm given that all the time. And we don't have a budget for this. I'm given that reason all the time as well. And we somehow have to insinuate this process into our daily process as designers and make it happen. We have had quite a unique challenge with COVID, in that we couldn't really get to some of the places that we normally can access the voice of children, which is typically schools. So we've had to be very creative with some of our online techniques for engaging children and make sure that they're child friendly and that the kids know that they're there. That's been quite fun figuring that out. It doesn't tend to be as thorough as face-to-face consultation, but we have found ways of reaching children through preference surveys, and that still a preference survey is better than nothing at all. So I encourage you to always think through, you know, it's that whole being flexible and pivoting with what's going on at the moment and saying we can do this, we will do this, and we're going to find a way to get kids to have a say. And then, of course, if you actually manage to get face-to-face with children and you can do a more authentic process, there are many beautiful examples available. I'm happy to try and share some of them, perhaps through Play Australia. We use a process called Gulliver's mapping. Some of you know about this. It's not our process. It's a Japanese process where kids map. They broadly discuss, draw, and write their suggestions for a playable space. And they are incredibly competent at doing this and incredibly instant at doing it, so much more so than adults, we find. So delightful process. Takes a fair bit of an analysis afterwards, and that's that whole thing somebody else was talking about before. You get really rich results, actually mind-blowingly rich, and it informs our design so beautifully and so powerfully that quite often we can say we did this because this is what children told us. How powerful is that? And this comes back to what's the economic benefit of that we were just talking about. The economic benefit is posterity for society. Can we put a financial value on that? That we were listened to, we were heard, and we acted on that. This is the posterity we all need for our cities. And that's, again, why we value this process so much. Anyway, happy to share any amount on this.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Fiona. Kim, in your line of work, you'd have some good examples as well of engaging with children and young people. Is there a different process or technique that's your go-to?
Well, we also undertake Gulliver's mapping in a sort of a different way, because we focus it around inclusion and thinking about beyond just a space of what you might like or your friends might like, but about everybody and everyone who's in your family and everyone who's in your community. So once we sort of identify that an inclusive play space or a passive recreation space is 0 to 100, and who do you go with and what do you do there, we actually take the children, and we're very, you know, in our day and age now, these children know how to visualize and create in their minds very easily, or often they've been to the sites. So we actually take them to the site in their mind and get them to think about what they would like to see there. So it's really visioning and see how it would function through their week, how they might use it in the morning, in the afternoon, on the weekend, if it's raining, with their grandparents, who takes them, what do they do there? What would they love to be able to do? How do they play? And then we go the next step where we say, so then what do we need to have that? And then what do we need to make sure that everybody can enjoy it together? And, you know, the kids are amazing. They're always coming up with the biophilic design, because they know that nature makes them feel good. When they're in there and you say, visualize this space with the tall trees, and they want tree houses, they want to climb them. When there's muddy, they want to play mud pies, they want to take risks. The innate desire for children to be able to play in a lot of the ways that we've not provided for them in standard provision comes to the top. And then also they know that, you know, you've got to put a seat or a tree, because otherwise grandma won't take me and I don't get to go. And we've got to put that fence around for inclusion or type of barriers, because my brother likes to run and that's really important. Okay, we need the pathways, we need the parking. This is also really valuable, I think, too, for us, as we were talking about the barriers to the spend. If you actually have the voice of the children and the families and whatever in your engagement, you actually have that to say, really important that we actually do when it comes down to design. And this is the resource and this is the reality, or this is the vision, and then how do we get the reality? So we start trading. And when the process is being done inclusively with everybody, not just the 20 or 70% of people that might fill out the survey, you actually get a lot more meat to be able to change make with decision makers.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Kim. Question from Damien. Damien, does your microphone work? If you like, you can introduce yourself and ask your question for the panel.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep, we can.
Nice. Yeah, so I'm a local play advocate here in New Zealand, embedded into local government. And my job is to activate the Hamilton City Council's play strategy, and they're making some great strides on some of the stuff, and I've been pushing for a lot of things that are in this advisory note. It's so cool to see. One of the challenges, or one of the things that we're sort of navigating is the interplay between the informal and the formal, and the formal space obviously has playground standards that the council will align to, that even though they're not a legal requirement, health and safety is a legal requirement and the standard is used as best practice. But curious to know any thoughts from the panel in terms of that interplay between enabling a more playable network from doorstep to domain, and the difference between how that's applied.
Look, I'll open it up to all of our panelists. Would anyone like to field this one from Damien?
I'd take a group of kids for a walk and just see where they start to bounce around, and watch the community as they interact with really open eyes. And you'll see the spots where you can start to create some of that. It's you know, I always say it's not rocket science. We've just got to open our eyes and open our ears. But I think that might be a really valuable starting point, because there's more than one way to do all of this. And I think ultimately, you know, every play space in every community is unique, and every, you know, public space. And so what we need to do is look at all of the users and have them make the decisions and lead the decisions. So get a group together and go for a walk with your decision makers.
Terrific. Thanks, Kim. Damien, we're pretty envious of the support that play gets over in New Zealand, and we love the fact that when we look across at local government in New Zealand, there are play advocates, and there's a big opportunity here for us. And wouldn't it be amazing if our local governments had play advocates and champions at that local level? Dana, from Camden City Council's perspective, how does this notion get up to have a local play advocate and someone who can champion the cause and make sure that play is looked at when these policy discussions occur? What do you think, Dana?
I think it's just about embedding it in everything that we do, putting ourselves in the shoes of the people that we're designing for. So we're creating in Camden, we're creating new communities. So who's going to live here? How will they use our spaces? How will future people use our spaces? What are their interests? I mean, my background is sport and recreation, and there's new sports and things that haven't even been created yet. So how do we not design out future possibilities? So it's really opening our minds and being flexible and thinking, is there another material that could do the same thing? So instead of a bollard, could we use a tree? How can we embed the natural wherever we can? And that's back to that question of blurring the lines between the formal play spaces and the nature. Just think of alternatives and just create that wonder and sense of, oh, what's over that hill, or what's around the corner, or how do I get there? And can mom and dad see me enough that they can see me, but I still feel kind of like I've got a little thing happening with my friends, So it's baby steps. And I think I would just not design any possibility out. The future is an amazing place, and everything that Play Australia and everybody's trying to do, play champions are part of the story, but if you don't have one, we can all still get there.
Thanks so much, Dana. We're sort of getting towards the end. Claire, we might go to you for the final question or comment before we round out proceedings.
Just quickly, I just wanted to go back to Damien's question, and I think one of the real opportunities is on the, finding the main walking routes to school and using that as a starting point, because if we can get children and young people to walk to school and back, then there's a good chance that they would have got 45 minutes to an hour's physical activity in. And if we can put some kind of playful provision in or affordances, they're more likely to take longer and be more active. So I see that as a real opportunity or a good starting point. And then yes, hope that helps. And we just have one last question. I don't know whether everybody can respond, but some of it's really been covered, I guess. But the next steps in terms of, Barbara touched on that optimistically the advisory note could be included in urban design guides. But yeah, the next steps for us, really. Where should we go from here to keep driving the conversation forward? If anybody wants to have a go at answering that.
We might go to the three of our panelists just for a really quick couple of reflections on the next steps. But Barbara, have you got any last words for us?
Yeah, I mean, I think interestingly enough, listening to the conversation, the key word that's emerged for me throughout is this notion of delight. So I think, but where it can be included is that potentially it could be cross-referenced in other documents such as policies, the upcoming urban design guide, in briefs and development control plans. I think also that there's a great opportunity for this document to be promoted, say through peak bodies. We could even put it, I'm happy to put it on, our workplace Facebook thing, just so that, just to raise awareness, possibly in newsletters, magazines, peak body magazines, that could be great. And, if we could get some endorsement of the document from industry leaders and organizations, I think that would be, really fantastic. But yeah, just like to say congratulations again.
Thanks, Barbara. Yes to all those points. Dana, any last reflections in terms of how we move this forward?
Very similar, but I think you know, thinking how it can really help us. And a lot of people in local government are often writing grant applications or award applications.
Yeah.
And how often do we forget to write about fun and play as a benefit? So let's just look at how we can use the practice note to support some of our awards applications and our grant applications, because who wouldn't want to give money to somebody that was going to promise fun?
Yeah, fantastic. Love it, Dana. Kim,
I
final
just think,
words?
yeah, look, like we always say, and I'm not, we all say, if you want to create a fun and playful play space or public space or an engaged space, you've got to undertake that in your process. What happens in the corridors, you know, comes out the speakers, so to speak. So what I would encourage and ask us all to do, because it's all of our responsibility, as Robin said, throw the gauntlet down to anyone and everyone you're speaking to, saying, look, it is our responsibility to children and to the UN Convention that we are doing this. And here is a document that can start you to do it, and, you know, and empower people to do it. So use it that way. So it'd be good if everyone who gets off the webinar today posts it and shares it and likes it and tags it and say, have fun using it. Because it is all of our responsibilities, and our kids and our families and communities deserve it, and we'll all be happier and healthier and more connected.
Love it, Kim. Let's get it out there. Look, thanks to our panelists. Thanks, Dana, Kim, Barbara, and our presenters today in Fiona, Claire, and Robin, and a big thanks and a really strong acknowledgement to our New South Wales committee, who have done a tremendous amount of legwork to bring this document to life. So let's share it. And thanks to all those who have attended today. We will share this advisory note with follow-up information. So there'll be an email coming into your inbox in the next day or so. It's also on our Play Australia website, but let's get it out there, everyone. Today marks the end of our autumn online learning series, and we'll be back soon with details on our next series in winter. So that's it from us at 12:02. Stay warm, stay safe, and stay
remember,
playful. Oh, hey, see, remember.
Remember,
yeah, that's it. That's it. The case for play. Love it, Robin. Thanks, everyone, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.